What do presidents need to know about the billion-dollar media landscape that now sits in front of us in college sports? Well, today's podcast is going to look at that very topic. With the Big Ten Conference signing a brand new media rights contract worth $1.23 billion annually, all of college sports has taken notice. Exceeding the NCAA's March Madness contract, the Big Ten will soon deliver between $70 and $100 million a year to every school in the conference. It's a staggering number and has positioned the conference as one of the top two in all of Division I sports. I'm Karen Weaver, and welcome to the podcast. My guest today is former Fox Sports president and CEO of Thompson Sports Group, Bob Thompson. Bob and I first spoke when I was researching the formation and the financial structures behind the Big Ten Network for my dissertation from the University of Pennsylvania. He was a wealth of information then, and that this conversation extends that discussion to where we are today. Bob is considered one of the most knowledgeable authorities in the sports television industry. During his more than 25 years at Liberty and Fox Sports, Bob negotiated more than 200 television rights agreements with professional sports teams, leagues, and collegiate conferences, and has been directly involved in the launch of 18 regional and national cable networks. Presidents must understand this enormously influential landscape. While you may bring in consultants and lawyers to help you navigate the details, having a fundamental appreciation of how this world is changing and where your school sits in the pecking order is crucial in how you approach the outsized expectations of your coaches, alumni, and boosters. One of the key points in our conversation comes near the end. We talk about the issues surrounding data and data acquisition by media companies. Presidents should understand all the innovative, and some would argue intrusive, data gathering techniques that add the true financial heft to these contracts. While it may seem secondary when you sign the contract, as gambling becomes more ingrained in our ecosystem, this will create the need for serious ethical conversations about who owns the student athlete's personal data. Hey, Bob, welcome to the podcast. I'm so glad that you were able to join me.
My pleasure, Karen. Very happy to be here.
You and I spoke more than a decade ago, as you were kind enough to be a key resource for my dissertation on the launch of the Big Ten Network, which happened in 2007. Gosh, 15 years ago now. For folks who are not media experts like you or media finance geeks like me, give us a sense of where we are in 2022 with the explosion of college sports on TV. It's not been that long ago that we could count on a few games, mostly football and men's basketball every weekend, but now that's changed.
Yeah, it's definitely changed since you and I talked, and certainly changed since, say 2010, 2015. I think part of the change that's being driven by this technology and how the linear broadcast networks and the linear cable networks that historically have been available as part of a cable TV bundle or a satellite bundle have taken some hits. And you've gone from, having maybe 100 million homes in the cable/satellite universe down to, 65 million homes, I think is the last number I saw. And so you got a lot of cord cutting going on. That's what we call people who were subscribers and then decide to cut the cord. And then you've got a lot of what we call nevers, and those are people who have never subscribed to either satellite or cable. And they are relying heavily on, either over-the-air television free through an antenna or through a streaming service, a la Netflix, Amazon Prime, Apple TV Plus, those types of things. And so as the cable numbers and satellite numbers have decreased, the streamers have gone into the world mostly of live or not live, non-live scripted type programming. Think sitcoms, think movies of the week, think episodic series, things like that. And all you have to do to realize that, how powerful they are in that space, is look at what the nominations are for this year's Emmy Awards. It's totally dominated by the streaming services. So what that leads to for the broadcast networks and the linear cable networks that are left is trying to aggregate audiences, primarily using, live sports and news. Obviously, for the cable sports networks like ESPN, Fox Sports 1, that's their lifeblood. That's what they live on. So obviously, they're going to continue to purchase those rights. but you've seen the broadcast networks really get back in, or more significantly into the collegiate sports world, because it has proven to be a very tried and true way of aggregating a large audience at any given time. So that's been the big change, and that's why I think what you've seen with the current Big Ten deal that just went down last week, where you've got 3 broadcast networks involved, and it's really a I call it an NFL model. In that you have, the Fox game, then the CBS game, and then the NBC game. It looks like a Sunday, it looks like a Sunday with the NFL. And I think that's, was what Kevin Warren was looking for, and he certainly achieved it. I mean, certainly the cable side of things is still going to be represented with Fox Sports 1 games, and, maybe NBC has some on USA Network. There's a streaming element with Peacock. So I think he touched all the bases. I think the big surprise for that deal is that ESPN's out after so many years.
Yeah, absolutely. And just again, as a refresher for my audience, linear is traditionally meant the main 4 channels. We go way back as CBS, ABC, NBC, Fox, but also what's bundled on your cable network or your satellite network. Streaming is considered anything that comes through the World Wide Web. Is that correct?
Yeah, it's more or less. You can get bundles through the web. Probably the easiest way to distinguish the two is with linear networks. The network decides what you watch. Okay. With the streaming service, you go to some app page or home page, and then you kind of click through and decide what you want to watch. The linear networks offer some flexibility in that if you have a DVR. You can record it and time shift it as you wish. But basically the difference is, me being the programmer versus the person sitting in the lounge chair at home being the programmer.
And just to dive just a little bit deeper, that's fundamentally a shift in demographics, because obviously Gen Z, millennials, are more inclined to want to watch it when they want to watch it on demand on any device. Older folks, perhaps like me, are more used to, searching for our content and waiting for it to come on. Does that seem fair?
Absolutely. I mean, the streaming services tend to skew a little younger. Although, they had the first Amazon Prime game last Thursday, and supposedly the average age was about 50, or 51, which isn't that far from your NFL's normal average age. It might be a little deceiving because a lot of the viewership was delivered by the 2 home markets, or the 2 participating team markets. About half of a million viewers came from Houston and San Francisco markets, where it was on over-the-air television. But I think that, and also Amazon Prime is kind of a different model than most streamers, as you don't buy it just for Amazon Prime. You're buying a Prime membership, which gets you the 2-day shipping and all those type of things. So it's not a typical streamer that you look at for a millennial or a Gen Z or those type of people that they would have as their sole streaming service, because I've got a 30-year-old son, and he doesn't even know what shipping means. So Amazon Prime is worthless to him. So yeah. And I don't think he'd buy it just for a few football games. But yeah, the streamers tend to skew younger. And it's important for the colleges and conferences to remember that, because that's going to be their future viewers at some point. You have to touch all your different audiences. And if that means broadcast, if that means cable, if that means streaming, there's an old adage: you have to fish where the fish are. And you've got to go to all of those ponds to hit all those different viewership types.
I think that's really important information for presidents to understand, because they're not only dealing with, current students, but they're dealing with alumni
Right.
that are all over the country. So a lot of these deals are designed to try to reach the largest possible demographic market, because one of the things that Kevin Warren, the Big Ten commissioner, cited was the fact that his alumni are all over the place. He has a significant amount of alumni on the West Coast, and that was one of the attractive reasons for adding USC and UCLA.
Absolutely. I think, with any conference, Midwest, pretty much anyone, the bulk of your alumni are going to, they may go to school in those places, but then they go to New York, Chicago, and LA, just like like most people do. But I think for Kevin, it was very smart was, A, the NFL model, B, he's, got some good dollars, obviously. You're going to have plenty of windows for football and basketball. And then C, he's got the peacock element. So he's going to have some events on a streaming service and exclusively on a streaming service. So it kind of conditions his viewership and conditions the fans of the Big Ten that, this is a way you have to learn to consume our product going forward because we're going to use it. Not unlike when they first launched the Big Ten Network back in 2007. It was kind of a new place. You don't get local syndication packages anymore. You find it here on your cable channel. You might have to go up to the 600s to find it, but it's going to be there, certainly within the conference's footprint. And I think they're doing the same thing with streaming. Are you going to put your top tier packages on there? Absolutely not. But because still, exposure and giving the programming out to as absolutely many people as possible, and the reach is still very important. But you also have to dip your toes into the streaming services so that as technology potentially changes, you have some experience, and your viewers have some experience with it as well.
That makes sense. So I do want to have you talk a little about tiers, and we've heard a lot about tier one, but what does it mean to have a tier one, a tier two, and a tier three media rights package?
Right. Normally tier one is what's reserved for the top level picks in both football and basketball. It's what it brings in your highest price, right? And that might be shared amongst a couple of people. For instance, right now, the Big 12, the tier one rights are shared with Fox and ESPN. Same with the Pac-12 and even the Big 10 right now. SEC shares tier one football rights with ESPN and CBS. So there's usually two people involved, two players. Maybe it's a broadcast network and a cable network. Maybe it's two cable networks. Maybe it's two broadcast networks. It really just depends on the conference and how they structured their deal. Tier two would be the next level, and that's the not the top games, but maybe the C and D games any given weekend that normally would appear on a cable network of some sorts. Tier three is pretty much everything else. So, Olympic sports, non-conference football, non-conference basketball, some regular season basketball, the bulk of the women's basketball. And that's what's used to populate channels such as the SEC network, the Big Ten network, ACC network, Pac-12 networks, ESPN Plus, those types of things. That's kind of considered the tier three. It used to be what the schools more or less controlled themselves and would usually be able to market within some specified geographic area, usually the state they were located in. They could syndicate those rights. Coaches shows usually went in those packages, things like that. So that's the third tier, and that's the least valuable in the pecking order, but still important. And some nice businesses have been put together out of those tier three rights because it's still valuable to the conferences and it's still intriguing and appealing to the viewers.
It is. And I remember having a conversation with Mark Silverman way back in the day, asking about how they were going to make money off the field hockeys and the volleyballs and that type of thing. He says, we're simply going to aggregate viewers and try to look at them collectively and see what we have. And do you feel like that's a similar strategy for the tier three rights? We're just trying to get as many viewers as possible. Absolutely. And I think, there's an audience for everything. It might not be large, but if you but you get to a point that you can aggregate them together and create a big enough audience, that's something that's sellable. The question becomes, how do you produce those events without killing your bottom line? And I think the Big Ten network and a lot of the collegiate networks have been very, very forward thinking with their production. I know that one of the initial things we did at the Big Ten network, which was a huge hit and continues to this day, is we, on certain events at a certain level, we would utilize student talent.
to produce the games, to call the games, to transmit the games back to Chicago, where we send them out. And it was, some of it wasn't the greatest TV in the world, but it was a tremendous learning experience for the students. And a lot of them have gone on to stay in the business. So I think the program that we came up with, the kind of the Student U Productions or whatever it's called, I can't remember. It turned out to be great. And it also creates the ability to cover some of these events at, prices where you don't have to roll a 48-foot production truck in there. It's some kids with some handheld cams and things like that. It provides good coverage that you wouldn't otherwise get on those tier 3 type of rights.
Yeah, I really want to emphasize that the evolving change in technology that allows you to do things much more simply and cost effective. I remember the first year I called field hockey color for the Big Ten Network. There was that production truck in the parking lot. I'm like, what is this doing here for field hockey? This doesn't make sense. So
yeah, we found out another way though.
Yes.
That's good, because the cost would, first of all, there's not enough trucks, and secondly, the cost would have eaten you alive. And so with the advances in the internet and the ability to produce stuff in the cloud and ship it around, IP based type technology, it makes it so much more easier than it used to be.
So let's talk money a little bit. When a network like Fox makes a value determination on how much they are willing to pay a conference like the Big Ten or the Pac-12 or maybe even the Big 12, what factors go into that? What should presidents be looking for on the list of things they should be covering?
Our list isn't significantly different than the list that a conference may look at if they're considering realignment. Ours more or less starts with numbers. How many households are in the markets? How many households are in the state that the institution is located in? Because most of these, a lot of these college towns are small town. They're not, top 25 DMAs. So we look, beyond just the conference's home city. Then we also look at things such as rivalries with either within the conference that they currently have, or what other rivalries they might have outside of the conference, and should we own the rights to that other conference? What kind of games can we put together between two rivals in different conferences, say Texas and Texas A&M, that type of a situation. Different conferences, but they are going to start playing each other again, which I think is great. So we look at those things. We look at certainly brand awareness. How does the brand resonate across the country? We look at what the fan appeal, the following of the institution. Success in both football and basketball. Normally the football gets all the credit for these deals, but in my mind, basketball was always worth 20 to 25% of the total value. It doesn't, the numbers don't click quite as much as football does, but the bulk of the games play at the time of year where networks need product. I think January, February, no football, baseball hasn't started. Got some, you've got hockey and NBA. Other than that, it's a, and they play multiple nights. So it's a tonnage factor. It provides a lot of programming, and especially for a 24-hour day, 7-day a week cable network, it's, they never quit eating, and you have to continue to feed them. So, we look for that type of thing. Even as we've had to take on the responsibility more and more, either through a network or a conference channel or through our own cable networks, we look at the Olympic sports. Do we pay a lot for them? No, but if it's got a good broad-based success in Olympic sports, be it the Pac-12 Conference of Champions, or the fact that Ohio State fields like 38 different teams in the Big Ten, those are important. I used to follow the Learfield Cup, which was basically everything outside of football and basketball, and how schools performed within that. And being a top 10 in the Learfield Cup was important to us. There is some value there. So those are the things, we look at. I think certainly if a conference was looking at maybe adding members, they probably get a little more into the cultural fit, How's the geography match up? Those type of things, which, that's that's for the conferences and the schools to figure out. I don't get into that kind of thing, but I know it's important to them, but it's not quite as important to the broadcast or cable networks.
So what are some of the other little details that presidents might want to consider? For example, a big deal is made out of, tonight Purdue and Penn State are playing on a Thursday night. There was a week
Right.
0 game last week
Right.
in Dublin. These are kind of oddities off the traditional, we play Saturdays and that type of thing. Should presidents be aware of who controls when games are played? I know times are always shifted, but even on days of the week, is that because there's a lot of pushback about missed classes and that type of thing?
Right. And I can understand that. I mean, we for years had the Pac-12 and we're kind of the ones that came up with the 7:30 kickoff times on the Pacific Coast, which wouldn't seem to make sense for the East Coast, but that's not what we were worried about. we were programming to the West Coast at that time. And if you're a sports network, the viewers expect to wake up at 9 o'clock in the morning on a Saturday, more or less, and be able to see college programming. And that does until you go to bed. And that doesn't matter if that's on the West Coast or the East Coast. So it's important, I think, for the schools to understand that, we don't like moving people around to odd times and odd days any more than anybody else does. But a couple of things. Number one is, when you play in those unusual windows, usually the competition is significantly less. There's not as, on a Saturday, you're going up against, at least 3 other games at any given time.
Right.
On Thursday night, there's a few more Thursday night games this year than there has been in the last few years because, colleges and the networks kind of took Thursday nights off the calendar because NFL was playing on Thursday nights. Now that the NFL is on Amazon Prime, the networks are going back up against the NFL on Thursday night. And so this year you see some SEC games, ACC games, all the conferences of the Power Five and even some of the G5 have Thursday night games. So I think that's important. Special date games, Black Friday, Labor Day, Thanksgiving Day, things like that are important as well, because it's not, in many cases, it's not possible for the networks to air all the games they have on a Saturday. They just don't have enough outlets. And so, rather than warehouse rights, which nobody likes, warehousing of rights is when you own the rights to a game, but nobody produces it. It just sits there and the game gets played and nobody can watch it. And that, nobody likes to see that. So to be able to, isolate a Thursday, a Friday, those type of things, it's important for the networks and to have some of that flexibility. The networks try and be as gracious and as accommodating as possible in that normally those games are picked up front in the beginning of the year so that there's not any 12-day or 6-day selections that change the time starts significantly. There's going to be some changes during the season, but they try and keep those to a minimum.
Do presidents have any ability to negotiate? I'd rather have this on Fox Sports 1 versus Fox Sports 2, those kinds of network decisions.
Usually that's pretty well laid out in the agreement between the conference and the network, and that there's X number of appearances on the broadcast network minimum, and and the rest kind of the total number of windows flows over to what could be on the cable. It doesn't mean there can't be more on the broadcast than the minimum number, but most times there are some numbers set, and there also can be appearance numbers. A certain team can only appear X number of times. Every team must appear at least X number of times. So kind of the flip side of too many appearances. You want to make sure everybody has appearances. So there is some say, but look, we're television is your friend. We want this to work for you guys just as much as it does for us. And I understand, and I had a lot of conversations with people over the years about the inconveniences that it causes for not only the players, who might have to travel, but for fans who have to, change their whole Saturday around, for the business owners in the local communities. We understand that there's a huge ripple effect, believe me. And it's something that we don't take lightly, but, in order for the value to be received that the networks are, shelling out, there has to be some flexibility as it relates to start times and end days.
That makes sense. So I have to go back and talk about the Nebraska Northwestern game in Dublin, Ireland this past weekend. It was week 0. Among many notable off the field activities, not to forget about the free beer that was due to no internet in the concession area for several quarters, I think. It struck me as the entire event was a 3-hour plus commercial to boost tourism to Ireland. The whole broadcast seemed very focused on driving fans, alumni, local CEOs, and et cetera to go abroad. How does that work with the network? It seemed very different in my estimation.
Yeah, it's a made game, we call it. There's a promoter in Ireland that kind of puts that together. They would go to, the conference and figure out, which teams can we get to come over for this weekend, for that special game. And then the promoter will pretty much sell it out. And, I watched a good portion of that game, and it was, certainly Ireland Tourism, Aer Lingus, which was also the title sponsor of the game. Very, very important to Ireland as, tourism mechanism, people who can deliver the tourists over to Ireland. And so that part was very important. And so what they'll do is, they'll pay the network a certain fee to, accommodate all the advertisers that the promoter might be bringing to the game. So it has kind of a little different look than a normal game would, but it's still, it's important. I think it's, the NFL has had that model for years. So has Major League Baseball. They play games outside of the country. NHL does, NBA goes to China. So it's important to kind of spread it around. And it takes a, willing promoter in the home country where it is to help pull this thing off, because the networks, they don't have the setup to do that. And so, I'm sure it was one of those scenarios where they, went to the conference, and, it was a good first step. There's been other games over there over the years. I remember I think it was a Navy something game in I think it was in Ireland years and years ago, 2005 or 6 or something like that. But it's important. And I think, you think this year was good, and there was a lot of people there, quite a few people. Notre Dame's going there next year is my understanding. Right. So it's going to be, it'll probably be twice as many, people flying in as have in the past. And, it turned out great. They had fantastic activities all week long. The stadium looked good. It's a soccer stadium, but it still works for football. Free beer, it doesn't hurt. They had great activities all week long for the people who were there. And, Dublin's a great city, and I'm sure the people of Dublin just absolutely loved the atmosphere and loved having the folks in town.
So is that negotiated with the Big Ten Fox agreement that it currently exists? Was that something that was counted towards the number of games, or is that something completely separate?
I would assume that's one of Fox's games,
okay,
for the year, but they have plenty more. So, and, it did a great number. I mean, it had like 4.5 million viewers, which was significantly higher than past year. The week 0 games are always a little sketchy. You never know what you're going to get. And it just comes down to the matchups. And those, certainly Nebraska has a strong national following. Northwestern, not so much, but it was a great game. Northwestern coming from behind to win. And then on top of that, I think it was good TV. It looked good. And Fox had, one of their top announced crews there. And so it seemed like a real, college game, not just some add-on week 0 game.
I agree with you. And I'm not in your position, but I thought it was very entertaining and very notable because of all of those things that you mentioned. So now let's take a little bit of a different look outside of the Power Five and talk about this tipping point that I think we're at with 2 legitimate super conferences who could possibly add more teams if the markets are right. But in all seriousness, I worry about the rest of Division I, those football programs not in these conferences, those who focus primarily on basketball, and those without football at all. Where do you think NCAA and Division I are going?
I think that certainly we have a situation now where you have two major conferences when it comes to football, because of just the differences in the television deals, which are going to be, in the foreseeable future, as well as probably beyond. And that's the SEC and the Big Ten. Whether they expand from here, I don't know. That's something that we'll have to see. I think if the Big 12 and the Pac-12 can get some sort of reasonable deals with Fox and or ESPN, that they can continue to compete in Division I football. ACC is kind of set with ESPN for till 2036, something along those lines. I think what they have to do, though, is they have to, have an expectation level that they're not going to get paid as much as the SEC and the Big Ten. That doesn't mean they can't compete. You can be very creative and you can be, very competitive without all that money. I think it's very important for you to have reasonable expectation levels. But I also always think that there's a way to, continually enhance your programs, get creative marketing wise, more sponsorships, things like that, that can add to whatever you get from television. I don't think that it makes sense for a lot of schools to move into these conferences. I mean, if you're in the Pac-12, soon to be Pac-10, and you are, you're a good program, but when you go over to the Big Ten, you're maybe not quite as good as you think you are. And I've seen a lot of schools move conferences, and it hasn't been a good result. I mean, if you look at how Nebraska used to dominate the Big 8, Big 12, they're not doing that in the Big 10. And A&M isn't dominating the SEC, and Missouri's certainly not dominating the SEC. Colorado hasn't done all that well in the Pac-12. So sometimes you're better off where you're at. You play to that level of, and you can be competitive. Would you rather be 10-1 in a Pac-10 and get less money, or 6-6 or 6-5 or whatever in the Big 10 and qualify for a lesser bowl? Whereas in the Pac-10, Pac-12, whatever it ends up to be, you win the title for the conference, you're probably in an expanded college football playoff. Mm-hmm. So, what did you rather do? And that's why I think it's important for college football in general to be strong across the country. Yeah. That's from the East Coast to the West Coast. Because if we have an expanded college football playoff, which it looks like we're going to, and it goes to 12 teams or 16 teams, college football has to matter across the country. You can't fill a 12 or 16 team playoff with just people out of the Big 10 and the SEC. There needs to be interest across the country. And I really think that the networks know that. I think the conferences understand that if you are in one of these lesser conferences in terms of television dollars, as long as they have a clear path to participate in a collegiate championship tournament playoff, then I think they can still be successful. And I think that's good for football. I mean, it creates, the networks know that. The networks know that, if you had an NFL playoff schedule that only had, the NFC North and the NFC Southwest and, just the middle of the country, nobody on the East Coast, the West Coast is going to care. They don't want to watch it. You have to have some drama for them to, A, follow their teams during the regular season to make sure they're going to see if they get in. And then B, once they get in, how's it go? And then you always want to see, like, if you get beaten, you want to see how the team that beats you does going forward. So it kind of feeds off itself. And that's what's been so helpful for, the professional playoffs, regardless of the league, is that interest maintains and its interest across the country. Doing that with college football is going to be very important. One of the problems, with the 4-team, the +1 format, whatever you want to call it, is that, there hasn't been anybody on the West Coast in for several years. And so it kind of becomes it's no big deal, And now it's huge in the Southeast and the Midwest because they have always had representation. And the ACC's done well over the years with Clemson and things like that. But it's really got to touch the whole country. It can't just be down the center, which is why I think it's important for these other conferences to continue. When you talk about the basketball only, that's a whole different, discussion. I think, it's you strip out football, then, you're talking about it's a whole different economic model. And I think that a number of the basketball only conferences, Big East, A10, I'm not sure who all is just basketball only these days, but they do fine, and they get a number of teams into the tournament because they're sticking to what they know. And they've realized early on that football's not, it's not the game they want to play. And so they concentrate on basketball, and they tend to do it very well. And it fits their model, which is, don't fight above your weight, as they say, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's important not just for Division I, but Division II, all of the conference, all the different levels of collegiate sports. Find where you belong and then embrace it and try and succeed in that place, as opposed to always, eyeing the next level up, because, sometimes the grass isn't always greener.
I think that's really good advice for presidents, because I see a number of schools in the last 10 to 12 years who have left Division II and gone to Division I, aspirations that they can get there. The old thing was, can you get your name on the ticker on the bottom of ESPN, or can you somehow elevate your profile so you have a better standing with your in-state students? But again, I also think about those football conferences like the American Athletic Conference, the Sun Belt Conference USA, that are clearly being left financially behind. So where do you think they fit in this whole model?
Well, I think that there's going to be some sort of path for them to be in an expanded playoff. And, Cincinnati got in and played well, and some other schools have snuck in. I think an expanded playoff is only going to help them. You get some more, from a revenue standpoint, they're challenged. There's no doubt. But I think one of the things that they can take advantage is of some of these new technologies out there, the streaming models and things like that, maybe they're not as valuable to ESPN and Fox, but they could be very valuable to Apple TV Plus or Amazon Prime or Netflix or whoever. So I think you have to, again, get creative and figure out what the best model is for you. I think some of the streaming services, been kind of, they've been involved in some of the discussions and in many cases, may have offered more money than some of the people who got the actual deals. But I think it won't deter them. But I think the streaming services need to maybe start with a smaller, a smaller deal in mind. And that is, you're not going to get a top pick in the Big Ten. Okay, well, maybe you can own the entire conference, the entire Sun Belt Conference, so they might need to reassess how they're entering the market and kind of learn to walk before they start running, show people that they can, handle these packages, do the productions, get them distributed, have some level of viewership, and along the way, write some decent checks, for that privilege to the, member schools of those smaller conferences.
Yeah, and I don't think they truly understand also how much work they're going to have to, the heavy lifting they're going to have to do themselves to build out the infrastructure on campus, develop the student you kind of idea, and to create the technology that needs to exist. That's an important part of this. I think presidents should pay attention to. I have two more questions, one more serious and one kind of fun. So I'll start with the serious one. Where does data collection fit in on all this? Are networks collecting data on the viewers? And we saw obviously what Amazon Prime did with the average age being 51, but we don't know if that was for the owner of the Amazon Prime account or if it was the demo. But data is a really important part of this. Where does this fit in? What should presidents know about that?
Well, data is very important, obviously, to the networks, because that's what and data, demographics, viewership levels, all those things are important because that's what we sell advertising based on. And then the other thing is for the, it's important to show to, say, cable operators, satellite distributors, that people are watching this service and you should continue to pay us this X sub per month fee that we do. The other flip side to the whole data thing is, and it's about the sports betting. And I know some conferences have waded into this. The broadcasts, most of the networks have, the cable networks as well. And that is, as more and more gambling comes online, and I know it's not always a phrase spoken in amateur sports, but people are going to bet on it, and you might as well get used to it. So all the sports books, the apps, all those people, they thrive on that kind of data.
Right.
And it's valuable, and it's sellable by the conference to some third party. I know the Pac-12 has entered into some agreements. I'm not sure exactly how many states have legalized gambling. I know Kansas started today, just in time for this weekend's college footballs. So it's becoming more and more important, and a lot of that stuff is data driven. The networks like it because it keeps people engaged. A lot of people don't just sit on the TV and watch the game. They've got their phone going, they've got their laptop going, they've got all this stuff going. And so you can create secondary feeds or, pullback feeds where the game is only in, say, 2/3 of the screen, and the other 1/3 at the bottom and the side is just jam full of data.
Right.
And either on that game or another game that might be happening that week. One of the interesting things I want to see that Amazon is going to do, and I don't think they've quite done it yet, is they're going to embed some of these Amazon Web Services chips into players, and they're going to be able to say, okay, this guy ran this fast, or this guy was faster than a speeding train or whatever, and then also measure things like hits. Right now you'll see it in baseball a lot, where speed off the bat, how far the home run went, things like that. And they get it instantaneously. And so, that's the kind of stuff that it brings in a slightly different kind of viewer, but it's important because in that case, it's probably an incremental viewer that you otherwise wouldn't have. And so that everything around data these days is extremely important. And I think it's in an effort to make a better overall presentation for the network, and also to appeal to people who might be interested in other things than just watching the game, such as gambling, the science aspect of the game, things like that.
Right. And that, of course, brings up a whole nother discussion about athletes' ability to share that data. Professional athletes can collectively bargain for it, but the college athletes at this point don't have that. So that's
something that's going to have to be dealt with.
I know. That is definitely for another podcast. My last question is this. You just joined Twitter. I think it was in June.
Right.
First, what took you so long? And secondly, what's the funniest engagement that you've had? Because you seem to engage with everybody on Twitter.
Yeah, it's, I really had I've had email since it was invented. So, but the fact is I've never had a social media account, and I used to call it face twit snapagram. And I just had never done any of them. And then, so I've been working with some different writers around the country and helping them kind of understand this whole realignment thing. And a couple of them said, you got to get on Twitter because that's where this is all played out. And you wouldn't imagine how many experts there are there in the Twitter land. And so it actually coincided with the fact that I had, at the end of May, rotator cuff surgery on my shoulder and my bicep tendon. And so I could do nothing. I've been retired since a long time, 2009. And I play golf 4 or 5 times a week. And that's my gig. That's what I do. In the summers, we travel. Well, I had the rotator cuff surgery. So I had this giant sling on. I could move nowhere. I basically laid on a lounge chair 18 hours a day, slept in it, did everything. And so I joined, and it was just so funny to see how much misinformation that was out there. And so I started weighing in, kind of dipped my toe in. At first, I didn't even have on my profile, I didn't even say what I used to be or what my job used to be. And then I got tired of people saying, what the heck do you know? So I put it on there. And, as people started going, well, maybe this guy knows what he's talking about. So the all-time classic was, we were weighing in about something about how much the Big Ten was going to make and what was going to happen in the other conferences and how all this worked. And this guy responds to me like, well, who the heck are you? And how the, H, do you know anything about this stuff? And so I didn't do it snarkily, but I guess it might have come across that way. I said, well, I've done like 3 Big 8, Big 12 deals, a couple of Big 10 deals, ACC basketball, Mountain West Conference, and a couple hundred professional rights deals with local teams or leagues. Oh, and the BCS. And the poor guy just got fried. I felt so bad for him. I apologized to him. I mean, the people are sending these, I get, what are they called? Memes or gifts or whatever. The guy was just, I guess with Twitter, you get a L if you're like a loser or something. And I felt so bad with the guy. I sent him a direct message once I figured out how to do that. And then he was fine. He had apologized and everything, but they wouldn't leave the poor guy alone. And part of it was I pinned the tweet to my profile. So anytime anybody looked at it. And so finally the guy sends me another message and says, you've been great about this, but do you think you could take it down? Could you take the pinned tweet down? I'd like, oh, absolutely. In a heartbeat. So I felt like, I thought that guy was going to change his name or something. But I actually saw him the other day. He was back out there. So that was kind of funny, but it's been an interesting thing. I'm learning. I have to learn not to, just respond flippantly to anything I see. I'm doing a lot more responding privately than, someone asks me a question on Twitter. I don't think everybody else needs to see about it. So I'll send them a direct message, something like that. But it can't take a lot of your time. And, my shoulder's better. I'm going to be out on the golf course here in about another month. So I may disappear as quickly as I appeared.
It's okay. Whatever. It's been quite a summer for you to jump into
been interesting.
Twitter.
Right.
Bob, I can't thank you enough for all your time, your expertise, your good-natured patience with the Twitterverse that's out there, and also you and I having the ability to reconnect after all these years. Thank you for taking the time. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure. My pleasure, and I'm glad you reached out to me. I wish everybody a great school year.
Thank you.
All right.